So today's intro is going to be a little bit different. Firefly and Serenity star Jules State's going to share with us her thoughts on the leadership qualities of Malcolm Reynolds. Now, Jewel is a supporter of the Restaurant Employees Relief Fund. The RERF is supporting restaurant employees who've been directly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, either through a reduction or loss in wages. So, if you have the means to give, please think about giving to the Restaurant Employees Relief Fund. You can go to rerf.us to learn more. Now, here's Jewel's gracious contribution to today's episode.
Brett let me know that you guys have started this podcast about leadership in pop culture, and was asking me why I thought Mal was a great leader. I mean, I'm sure Kaylee would have wonderful things to say about Mal, but me being me, I have mostly good things to say too, actually. I think one of the reasons why he was a great leader is because he was quite fearless. He could be fierce when he needed to be. But most importantly, he was very loyal. He was loyal to those who were loyal to him. And he loved his crew very much. I mean, yeah, he could be a little bit of a sourpuss. But, I mean, I guess even leaders have days like that. I have a soft spot for Mal, though, so it's hard for me to think of him as anything but pretty darn wonderful. And that crew was very lucky to have him as their captain. Maybe that's Kaylee speaking through me. I don't know. I also love Nathan Fillion a lot, too, so maybe there's a little bit of that seeping in. Thanks for ordering the cameo. Take care, you guys. Stay shiny.
I am thinking, and to be fair, one of the characters that I liked the most was the assassin in Serenity.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I liked him quite a bit.
The true believer?
The true believer. He was disciplined. I think him and Malcolm sort of mirror each other just a little bit in that the ends justify the means for what it is that they're trying to get. But I don't know. I really liked him. I liked his dedication to his cause, and as far as leadership goes, I mean, he was out there doing it. He was a little one-man army, and something about that. I don't know. Something about his character, just the focus, just really appealed to me.
So was it the killing of children that was that was what did it for you, or
no? Although
okay.
I have some friends that are elementary school teachers that would probably disagree with that. No, it wasn't that, but it was. Again, like when you look at when you look at Malcolm and you look at him, I think they're sort of mirrors of each other, but sort of in opposite directions. And again, I'm gonna become the person that doesn't remember people's names in any of these films that we watch.
That's me in real life, so don't worry.
Okay, good. But I think what the assassin is trying to achieve versus what Malcolm is trying to achieve, and the methods by which they go about doing that. The assassin wants, like a society, right, and order, and those sorts of things, and is willing to do whatever it takes to get those things.
I'm sorry. If your quarry goes to ground, leave no ground to go to. You should have taken my offer. Or did you think none of this was your fault?
I don't murder children.
I do. If I have to.
Why? Do you even know why they send you?
It's not my place to ask. I believe in something greater than myself. A better world. A world without sin.
So me and mine gotta lay down and die so you can live in your better world?
I'm not going to live there. There's no place for me there, any more than there is for you. Malcolm, I'm a monster. What I do is evil. I have no illusions about it, but it must be done.
Keep talking. You're not getting a location trace off this wave.
And every minute you keep River Tam from me, more people will die.
You think I care?
Of course you care. You're not a Reaver, Mal. You're a human man, and you will never understand how...
What about his character? Let's go back to the whole like organizational leadership perspective. Let's erase the specifics of his drive, right? Of what he was willing to do to get the job done. Do you think that those qualities, the qualities that he represented in the film, would work in a corporate environment?
Yes.
How so?
There is a singular focus that goes behind. Sorry, and there's a passage that I'm looking for from one of these from Leadership by James McGregor Burns that I was
I have
looking
that
at
book.
earlier. Yes. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think there's something about his. There is something about his drive. I remember in the last podcast we talked a little bit about the sociopath and the sociopath's willingness to do whatever it takes to move on to the next thing. And I think to most, I don't think most people are seeing the heinous things that he's doing. So from the outside, perhaps he looks like a good, righteous leader. Who's furthering the cause of his people and of his society, but on the inside there is a real turmoil and a real moral dark spot. And I think those, the reality, the dark reality, and it's often depicted in Firefly, is a lot of times those moral dark spots aren't coming through, and people don't get to see those. And so they're still effective, I guess.
You're still talking about the assassin, right? Or the operative?
Yeah, the operative.
Elizabeth, you look like you disagree. As far as you look like you don't want to work for him in the corporate setting.
No, I don't want to work for him, to be clear.
And so, Alex, just to come back, your I guess claim is that he can be an effective organizational leader.
Yes, I think he could be an effective organization. Like, it depends on what your focus is. I mean, is your focus on the organization and the mission, or is your focus on the means and methodologies by which you get to those higher organizational ideals? If the means and methods by which you get to those higher organizational ideals don't really matter, well, then yeah, he's a great leader. But similarly to I think how Mal would be a great leader in this case, because he, although not killing children, is also fairly morally gray or dark.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying from a systems perspective, he's an effective leader.
I think so.
In certain older, civilized cultures, when men failed as entirely as you have, they would throw themselves on their swords.
Well, unfortunately, I forgot to bring a sword.
Liz, what say you?
Yeah. So you're talking about him like he's the scalpel, right?
Yeah.
Cutting out the cancer or whatever it is. I think he might be a good short-term solution, like you're talking about, leadership for a hostile takeover, or for something like that. If it's come to that, I guess. But I certainly don't think that he would make a good long-term leader, or creates a healthy environment for an organization. I think he would be useful for some of those short-term, huge culture change solutions, if that's what if that's what your organization needs. And certainly there are organizations that need a shock to the system. But I don't know. I do think that it's interesting how he ends, right? Because you do notice then that he's not somebody that, I don't think he's a sociopath based on that, right? Like, he thinks he is doing the right thing for the most good for the most people. And then in the end, I think he realizes he didn't do the right thing. And that's what makes you realize maybe he's not a bad leader, I guess, or his intentions were pure. I know. What do you think, Brett?
I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Fair enough.
No, I tend to agree with that he would make a great consultant. That would be, and I guess we have to kind of like we have to kind of define what we're talking about. We're talking about, like, would I follow this man into battle? Would I pledge my sword? Versus, in figurative battle, in the organizational sense, versus, do I think this person can be an effective implement inside of an improving system? I do think he would be a great implement in as far as like a consultant or something like that. I think the issues that I have with him are mostly like, I'm all about somebody who lives their values, and he lives his values, right? It's just his values are very, very different than my values.
Yeah.
And so I have to kind of applaud somebody who's willing to be that dedicated to the path that they've chosen. And again, not through their methodology, but through their singular vision. But I also think that in a organization led by somebody with that specific of a focus, they're going to miss things sometimes, miss opportunities for improvement. They're going to miss opportunities for change. And I've worked in a space with someone with a singular vision that was in line with the organization's values, but to an extreme level that didn't allow for any difference of opinion or different strategy or different approach from those within his employ. And then you ended up with conflict, and you ended up with a stagnant work environment in a place where people weren't comfortable voicing their opinions.
Okay, baby, we talked this through.
Hugging ain't doing. That's Russia!
So let's talk about Zoe for a second, because I just kind of led us into Zoe land. Liz, what are your thoughts on Zoe's character and her leadership within the crew and in the show? And would you want to work for Zoe?
Yeah, I would. I think, Zoe probably does display the best leadership of anybody that I can see on there. She is used to that military lifestyle. So this kind of autocratic leadership that we see from Mal in Serenity, that we don't see it as much in Firefly, but she knows that, it's his ship, and so she follows his lead, but she also gives him feedback, which I think is really important, and tries to, stand up for what's right while following her leader. So I can appreciate that from her. Why is she your favorite?
Why is she my favorite?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think honestly, just because I believe that the best thing a leader can have is a strong number two. And I felt like they wrote a really strong Riker character, a really strong second in command character for Malcolm to play off of. She was his conscience at times throughout the series, in the show or in the film. She was his sounding board. He sought her opinion on things, but he also kind of let her know when he was making the call. Right? He valued her opinion, but he also made the decisions. And I felt like, aside from the fact that I loved the character that I wrote for her, and I loved, like, again, how witty she was, and I always like a strong female character that isn't afraid to like make fun of you or shoot you in the head. That I just think that she did a really good job backing him up in all of the times where he needed to be backed up, and also setting him straight when he needed to be set straight. And she was kind of one of those characters where she's going to do what he says, and then she's going to let you know about it after everything's done.
Yeah.
And I really liked that.
No, I think things will glide a deal smoother for us without River and Simon on board. How long do you think they'll last?
Doc made his call.
Yeah?
There's his babes in a basket when we took him in. We sheltered him plenty. Man has to cut loose. Learn to stand on his own.
Like that man back in town?
I had to shoot him. What the Reavers were done to him before they killed
I
him?
know. That was a piece of mercy. But before that, him begging us to bring him along.
We couldn't take the weight. It would have slowed us down.
You know that for certain?
Mule won't run with 5. I should have dumped the girl? Or you? Or Jane? Oh, Jane.
You could have tossed the payload.
Tossed it. Zoe, I got bits falling off my ship. I got a crew. Ain't been paid. And oh yeah, Powerful need to eat sometime this month. We tell Fanti and Mingo we skunked the job. What do you think they'll do to us? We're close to gone out here. We got a job. We gotta make good.
Sir, I don't disagree on any particular point. It's just, in the time of war, we would have never left a man stranded.
Maybe that's why we lost.
Alex, how did you feel about her?
Yeah, similar. She's going to tell you how she feels. It makes me wonder. And this is one of the quotes that I found in the leadership book that was interesting. And I know like reading on a podcast isn't always the best, but I just have a quick sentence or two that made me think of. There's a dynamic between her and a dynamic between Mal that I think is kind of interesting. And it's reform leadership by definition usually implies moral leadership, and this imposes a special burden. That means that reformers must not follow improper means in trying to achieve moral ends on the ground that the means can taint and pervert the ends. Taking moral leadership means that one must also win. A strong success ethic attaches to reform, at least in some Western nations. So in if she is sort of the moral compass to Mal, informing him that she's not happy with a particular action, or she is sort of letting him know, like you said, she's that honesty maybe that he needs to keep him in check. To me, it's the maybe the differentiation between do the means really justify the ends in order to meet that success, so that the quote moral side really can win, versus is it more important to be truly moral throughout each action along the way, and how do you balance those two things? And so I think having her voice next to Mal's perhaps is an important dichotomy in that discussion. So I don't. Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I think. But I agree with your sentiments on it's important to have a strong number 2, and I think she fills that role quite well, like you said.
Elizabeth, anything else with Zoe?
Yeah. I feel like he and Zoe in Firefly work really well together. This kind of like feedback loop for each other, and I think part of that is because Mal is more moral in the show than we see him in Serenity. And so I think she trusts that he has that morality, and so she can talk like this to him, and they can do that together. So I think that's part of the dynamic that we see happening.
River?
I swallowed a bug.
I think River in a lot of ways was a plot device, or a MacGuffin, or a Deus Ex Machina, like whatever you want to call it. In a lot of ways, she was central to that conflict, for sure. It's like the little brother that you're willing to fight over, except maybe more important, like if that little brother contained the secrets to toppling the empire or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know, Liz. How do you? How is she an analogy in your professional space, or in your experience, or in your world?
So in organizational psychology, where would she fit into that organization?
Where would she fit in your opinion, or does she fit in, or is she a plot device, or a MacGruber, or whatever Alex said?
I mean, I don't know. I think she's used as more of a plot device. It is interesting to me that she is outside the situation because she can be, right? And certainly there may be people within an organization that don't have a need, like she doesn't have to get paid. She doesn't care about that. You know what I mean? So maybe there are those people that work for an organization and are just there, right? I think in the movie she does, serve some uses. She gets them out of bad situations into them as well. I don't know. I wouldn't call her like somebody that you'd see that's just kind of sucking from the system, kind of like the Deadwood. I don't see her as that either.
Yeah, and I wouldn't like the person I was referencing, or people I was referencing in our prior professional experience. They weren't that either. I guess for me, it comes down to making choices. So like what you said when you said she lives outside, or she exists outside of it, that triggered something for me. Like she really throughout the series and most of the film, until the very end of the film, she really makes no decisions. She doesn't have to choose, and she doesn't choose. And it isn't until the end, when she throws herself at the Reavers, she actually makes, I think, her first decision. And it's a good decision, right? It's she understands her capability. Even when she's defending Kaylee back in the episode where they're in Nishka's station or whatever, and she kills those 3 people, that really was more of like a mental exercise for her, right? She she did the geometry, and she's like, I think I can do this, but she wasn't really actually making a choice. I think she was just responding to a situation as she'd been programmed to do.
Right.
But and it's when she makes that choice that she suddenly she moves from being a plot device in my mind to an actual character who's has a very brief period of agency inside of that.
Yeah.
River, I'm sorry.
No.
I hate to leave.
He won't. You take care of me, Simon. You've always taken care of me. My turn.
It makes me wonder about the question of followership. In again, like, what do you need to do as a leader to get the most out of those who are, I say follower. I mean, whether it's an employee or whatever. But what's your responsibility as as an employee for followership? At what point do you have to make a decision? And again, I would come back to the necessity of do the means justify the ends, and it had to get dire enough that she was willing to make a choice. I think maybe in both of those circumstances, maybe more so when the Reavers were breaking down the door, but it had to get dire enough for that employee or that crew member or whatever to make that decision to take action. And I wonder if that's not also true. Like, how many in an organization that's not functioning the way that it should, where you do have mismanagement, misappropriation of resources, the wrong people getting promoted, nepotism, all that gross toxic stuff, how much of that stuff has to take place before you do have the River Songs start to step up and confronting the Reavers or confronting the bad stuff? What does it take to engage those employees on a level that says, we're not going to take this anymore? And in this place, I mean, at this point, we wouldn't be talking about like making the choice with the consequence being a real death. We're talking more about like a career death, so to speak. Am I willing to take the actions necessary, even though it might mean that I get fired or lose real security in my real life? I just think of those two decisions. When I think of her, I think of that followership, and I think of, am I willing to sacrifice something beyond me in order to do the right thing for the the organization at that point?
I find it interesting that Brett, you were saying she doesn't make a choice. She's not really given a lot of opportunity to make choices, right? Like, and I think, Alex, to your point, I think most of those people will quit and move to other organizations. before they will sacrifice themselves for the organization, right? Like,
throw themselves on the gears and the
right, by
Yeah.
speaking up and making a choice. I think the
Yeah.
choice that they will generally make is goodbye.
Abandon ship.
You have not given me the ability to make good choices in this organization, or to speak up and or given me the agency to do my job well.
I feel
They could have
personally
used
attacked.
her probably better than they did.
How do you create followers then? I mean, again, in that toxic environment, where does that change come from? If you're not able to create followers that are willing to throw themselves on the gears, or that are willing to take on the Reavers and sacrifice their body before they move on to the next thing, like how do you motivate people to do that? There's not really a good source of that motivation if you don't have good leadership, if it is a toxic place.
Well, I would say, when she opted to go and throw the bag and take on the Reavers, she made that decision because suddenly all of this became incredibly personal really,
Right.
really quickly, right? And I think oftentimes when we're looking within an organizational structure, we have those characters, we have those people who are able to just kind of not have to make a decision. They're able to just exist and contribute. I mean, they're contributing in their way. Sometimes it's not as much as as they could, but it isn't until they're actually challenged with something that's incredibly personal, that affects them directly, that they're actually having to make a choice.
I won't get it! You shoot me if they take me! Well, don't shoot me first!
Have either of you played the XCOM video games?
No.
Okay, so in the XCOM video games, just to set it up just a little bit, is the whole premise of the game is it's an over-the-top strategy game, right? So it's an overhead view, and you get to set up a squad, and the squad goes out, and you get to set up your crew members, right? And each crew member, you can have like a heavy machine gunner and like an assault rifle guy, and like the spy or whatever. You have all these different people that have very specific roles. And what's cool about that game is as you go through the game, the choices that you make have real consequences. And so, for example, let's say you lose the assault rifle guy or some other person. You get really attached to these little characters as you go along. You're like, no, I can't believe blue hair dude died, or whatever. You get really into this stuff. Jane to me is like, if I like there, it seemed like every time I would play through that game or a round of that game or whatever, there was always one guy that like made it through to the end, and he was like the grizzled heavy machine gunner, like I don't know, but Jane to me just filled that role. He was always like the one who made it through, and it was just this you loved him because he was there. I don't know how else to put it.
Like, he's a survivor, right? Like, that's his character,
Yeah.
is he'll do what it takes to survive.
Yeah, and there's something about that just, good, I'm glad he made it. He's here, I don't know.
Liz, what do you think of Jane?
So, my comments on Jane are probably a little more from the series. Sorry.
Yeah.
But I love so like we see how Jane gets picked up and stuff like that. He makes a choice for the money, and he makes these survivor types of choices, right? But then after he turns on the doctor and River, you can tell that he feels guilt when Mal locks him in the air, like he's gonna let him go out the airlock or whatever. Because don't tell him,
Yeah.
He's got all that guilt going on because he knows he does have morality. It's just kind of buried under there, but I think Jane has potential to be developed really well into a very good employee. He just needs some attention, some grooming,
some mentoring.
Yeah. And I think one thing I like about Mal in that series is that he gives individual mentoring, right? At the right level. Like to River, he's a different leader than he is to Jane, than he is to Zoe. And for Jane, he's hard lined, like, I'm ready to kill you, kind of a thing, because that's what Jane understands. That's his level of understanding. And I think like we see right there when he's like, okay, well, just don't tell them what I did, you know, then you're starting to see, okay, there's potential and we can build this person into a good leader if he got the right type of guidance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Would Jane fulfill sort of a heroic leadership archetype?
Like the hero's path kind of thing?
Yeah, like the form of leadership. Like there's charismatic leadership. There's
Yeah, which
heroic
Mal has
leadership.
some.
Yeah, Mal has some of that. He has some of the heroic. And to me, like when I think of Jane, I think of what was it, the Ballad of Jane, and whatever else. But would he be the heroic leader that came through in a crisis and was able to shine because of that, or
Eventually, I think
maybe to
so.
them? I mean, yeah.
I don't think he is at the moment.
Right. Yeah.
But I think he has the potential for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I like that there's several instances in the show and then the film very specifically one where he challenges Mal's leadership.
Uh-oh.
And in the movie he
Oh, dear.
says he's like, do you want to lead?
He's making
And he's
the
like,
same
yes, I
face as our intro video was briefly.
Yeah, I know.
did I freeze?
Oh
You
yeah,
froze.
you totally
I froze.
froze.
Yes, back up just a
Okay.
little bit.
Well then that'll be a good area for me to splice footage over.
Yeah.
So one of the things I like about Jane, let me get back on track. One of the things that I like about Jane in the series and then in the film is there are a couple of instances where Mal is just kind of like, do you want to lead? And in the movie, like specifically, he was like, do you want to be in charge? And he's like, yeah, I do. And then he's like,
Are we caring about that?
You dumbass logs! The only people she's a threat to is us on this boat.
Look, we get back to Haven in a few hours'
Oh
time.
yeah, hiding under the shepherd's skirts. That's a manful scheme.
You want to run this ship?
Yes.
Well, you can't.
Do a damn sight better job than you.
there's the whole like Mal, the train robbery episode, and they're like, okay, well, they're done, and I'm going to take the ship and I'm going to go. As I said, so he kind of like, he wants to lead. He thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks he could be in charge. But then when he comes kind of right down to it, he knows he can't. I think we've all seen those overly anxious leadership students that we've worked with in a professional setting who think they're ready to go. Maybe we've been those people. Maybe we are those people who think that they're ready to make the right call, to lead their teammates or their crew or whoever into whatever comes next, but they know they're not. And so there's a little bit of that insecurity that lives below the surface and causes them to be a little bit more cantankerous about things and grumbly and everything else. And when it comes down to it, they really aren't ready yet to take it on. And really in the film, it's when Zoe goes kind of, a little bit, who's the character? Rambo. And she goes a little bit Rambo at the end of the film after, Wash has died, and she's reacting emotionally to that. She's not as processing it as responsibly as she thinks she is. And it's Jane who really gets everybody back on track. He gets everybody where they need to be in the choke point, and he really steps up. And it's in that instance that he becomes the leader for the first time in the entire series or movie. And so it was kind of redemptive in a way for him, where he's gone through all of this stuff, and he's always kind of been pushing for the opportunity to lead. And you're kind of like laughing at him because that he's, there's plenty of examples where that's not going to work out until it needs to, and then it does really, really well. And I enjoyed watching that scene with that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
How do you because I know, I'm thinking of past relationships with coworkers at organizations and those sorts of things. How do you take the employee that, like you said, sort of is the cantankerous complainer, and get them to a point to where they're no longer just complaining about the situation as it happens to them, and get them invested into making change and having them be somebody that's actually affecting change, sort of like in that situation. I've worked with folks who they will complain and complain and complain. And when you bring up the idea of, oh, well, have you talked to so-and-so about it? Have you tried this? What about this? And it's always, well, no, I don't want to do that because, and it's always like a no. So is it by throwing them into a situation where they're forced to be the one dealing with those consequences? Or, that's something that I've always struggled with a little bit.
Liz, what do you think about that?
So that comes down to a couple things, right? Like people may complain but stay in their job because of high neuroticism. So you're going to have personality characteristics in play, and you kind of need to get to understand why that person is complaining, right? And then I think there'll be different recipes for success based on that. That type of behavior can actually be pretty bad for at least the climate of a work group, because it's so negative. And so it does need to be, addressed. And if somebody is complaining legitimately, then they need to be given opportunities. Like you're saying, if they are, legitimately complaining because their boss is a micromanager, and they're not able to have the agency to do what they know they can, then they should be given those opportunities. And if they fall on their face, they do. Obviously in an organization, you want to make backups for that kind of thing. Like, oh, they fell on their face, and now we have this plan. It's okay, because you can't take huge risks with other people's money, and livelihoods. But I guess letting them take those risks in a controlled environment would be good.
Yeah, I liked what you said about different recipes, because I do think that there's the different motivations for that complaining person. Like I have experience with people who just complain because they don't feel like they're being challenged in their role. In some cases, it's because they're not being challenged in their role. And if I'm a leader and there's a person that feels like they're capable of more, and they're going about it in either a less destructive or a constructive way, then it's up to me to give them opportunities to, number one, succeed and prove that they are capable, or number two, get a taste of what it's like to be in a position of responsibility, and to see that, oh, it is a lot more difficult than maybe they think it is. I think that's one of the things. Like, what I would like to know is Jane going to complain less after the end of Serenity than he did before? Or do you have those characters that pissing and moaning is their expression regardless of the environment, and that they're just cranky pandas, which cranky panda is like the most G-rated way to say pissing and moaning, but they're just cranky pandas, and they're always gonna, one of the people that Alex and I both know who was in a leadership role when we were in college was one of those people where you'd walk down the hall and he'd just yell at you, and sometimes he'd just yell insults at you in a way to kind of like get you to engage with them and stuff. He's a great man, but I know that I'm never going to sit down and just like have an intimate, heartfelt conversation with him. He's just always going to be kind of grouchy, that's the word. He's grouchy and complaining about what's going on. But he's still capable of leadership. It's just that's not one of the qualities that I would want to mimic were he to be my leader, were he to be my mentor.
I guess one of the questions that I always roll around in my mind is what is the responsibility of the follower in those situations where they're not being given the even limited amount of agency by their leadership in order to make those decisions? If they truly care about their growth as an employee, is it their responsibility then to either enact their own change from where they're at and see where that goes, or is it their responsibility to leave the organization? The reason I ask that is because how do you really, if you really care about enacting change in an organization, how do you go about doing that if you're not given those opportunities? And if those changes that you want to make or those systemic toxicities that you see, what if that just isn't aligning with the organization? How do you make that valuation within yourself, whether to leave, go? Do I make a great sacrifice of myself to try to move something forward? those sorts of things.
I mean, there are some good books on followership, right? Or leadership and followership. And some guidelines for that. I think for myself, making connections and I did this in the past and, at other organizations than the one I'm at now, but building up your personal power. So influence with others and things like that, having people want to work with you. I didn't do it on purpose, but it is what happens over time, right? When you make connections and you work successfully with people. And I realized that helped to cause some change.
So that's that. Let me just interrupt you because that's what I do. But that's true servant leadership. Like you're not operating from a position of control or management on a large scale, but you're building consensus and you're building a team, and suddenly now you're leading in your specific area, even if you're not being recognized for that, right?
In effect, at least in some cases. I mean, you still have to answer to the powers that be sometimes, and of course it can be disheartening to try over and over and over again something that would be good, or that you have, so I'm an organizational psychologist. So I know the theories and I know the research, and the research may say this, and I present the research, right? But there may be people that say, oh, that's lovely research, but we're not doing it that way, And then if you do that enough times, of course, you're going to feel devalued as an employee, and you'll want to probably look for an organization that will value that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I we touched on this earlier about like throwing yourself on the gears and making the sacrifice or whatever. But I do think for me personally, there's my vision of what works. And that's my perspective. I may even have an industrial organizational psychologist saying this is what the science says, this is what the data says, to back up at least my opinion on things. But at the end of the day, if I'm in an environment where I don't believe I'm going to be able to convince people to make that change, then I think it's almost my responsibility to find an organization that's more aligned with my strategies and my values, and let the environment that I'm leaving play out in what I would hope would be a good way. It's kind of like one of those situations where like, I really hope I'm wrong. Like I kind of feel like I say the same thing time after time after time. And I really hope I'm wrong, because that means that ultimately the best thing is happening. And it's just me that's grumpy every once in a while or all the time. But yeah,
Grumpy panda.
Yes, I'm a grumpy panda. So I would say that there's a middle ground. I think you were saying this too, Liz. There's a middle ground between abandon ship, right?
Yeah.
Or just become so entrenched in negativity in the system that you're no longer being effective or productive in the role that you've been assigned to do, regardless of what that is.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Kaylee managing the drivetrain, the engines, if you're Malcolm running the whole show, or if you're Jane, whose job it is to be the muscle, who's literally recruited from the other side of a scenario gone bad, then yeah, I think you have to take your skill set elsewhere before you become a detractor from the mission and the values of the organization you represent.
You'll have to decide at what point, that happens for you too. I think different people have different tolerances. So for me, if I win, 1 times out of 5, maybe that's enough, and then I can slowly help the organization. If I'm losing every single time, or maybe it's a win 1 out of 25, I'm not sure that's enough, to keep me feeling like I'm helping improve things enough to stay.
Yeah. All right. Let's take anybody else have anything they want to say about Jane before we move on?
No.
Okay. I want to let's do something a little bit different. Let's take 30 seconds each, and we're going to talk about Shepherd Book.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about Simon, and let's just give them 30 seconds each. So let's do Shepherd Book first. since I threw the assignment out there, I'll go first. So Shepherd Book is one of those characters that I was really sad to see in the film not be a part of the story in the long term. And he's also one of those characters where unless you get into the background literature through the graphic novels, there's so many questions that they kind of hint at, right, when he's stepping in to save them in a couple of situations, which really a normal shepherd wouldn't be able to do. I think from a leadership perspective, the thing that I like about him the most is he's a moral character who lives his morality and who isn't afraid to talk about his morality, but also doesn't shove his morality into the group and make it kind of the what's the word I'm thinking of, but make it the only way that he can connect with people. Right, he doesn't isolate he doesn't isolate himself through his morality. He's able to connect with. He's able to spot Jane while Jane's bench pressing. That's one of the little things that duo does is they work out together. But Jane and Shepherd Book on paper are as far apart as they could possibly be. And I think that is one of those leadership qualities that we should all be looking at nurturing within ourselves, is how to be a strong moral, values-based leader who can connect with people regardless of what they're bringing into the organization. Liz, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, to me, Shepherd Book, right, is a true servant leader. That's your true servant leader model right there. He doesn't always agree with what's happening, and he'll, say that, and he'll say this is how it should be, and how could, and then he'll support his stance, but he doesn't say, oh, now I'm doing this for this low person, you have to do the same thing or whatever, like it's like you said, he's just not forcing his morality on anybody. He's leading by example, and be that, and that's all.
I could have left her there. I had an out. Hell, I had every reason in the verse to leave her laying whole anchor.
It's not your way, Mal.
I have a way. That better than a plan?
Only one thing's gonna walk you through this, Mal. Belief.
I always look to you for counsel, but sermons make me sleepy, Shepherd. I ain't looking for help from on high. That's a long wait for a train don't come.
When I talk about belief, why do you always assume I'm talking about God?
Yeah, it's not a punitive morality. It's not cancel culture. It's very much the type of person that can meet you where you're at. And I've always appreciated leaders who are willing to meet me where I'm at, regardless of whether or not I was where they were. I had a great boss when I was living in Florida still. It's one of those things where, like, I probably still won't name names, even though it's a good example. But I remember one time he sat me down. I was going through some hard stuff in my personal life, and along with that was also losing this contract that I was on, working for the place where I was at in Florida. And I remember he sat me down on a bench, and we were outside by a lake, because where we worked was by a lake, so it was kind of perfect. But he said, I see what you're going through, and I think of the story of Joseph in the Bible. And he really just sat me down. He didn't provide answers, but he sat me down and talked to me. And it just felt like a real similar example of, I think, how Shepherd would have reacted in that situation. And I know, as I look back, it's those soft touches, those soft appeals to humanity that were maybe the most effective as I look back in my career, because that's a conversation that was a long time ago, but it still stands out very clearly. So,
Set course for Beaumont. First thing, I want this body.
Simon!
Eat so small!
Son of a hole!
I'm a hair's breadth from riddling you with holes, Doctor.
One simple job. She'll be fine.
She is fine! Except for being still crazy, she's a picture of health.
Right. How about Simon? Liz, you wanna share something about Simon?
Yeah, sure. I would say, Simon is pretty focused on his goal, on his sister. She is his world, more or less. But he is willing to, and we see this more in the movie, almost to a negative degree, where he and Mal are head to head, right? And he's willing to stand up for what he believes in. And you know, I'd say I can really appreciate that about him. I wish there was more dialogue between everybody. You know, as far as like, let's talk more about why this would be good or why this would be bad, you know, and consider everyone's needs, you know. Neither he nor Mal seem to be doing that, but yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents.
All right, Alex.
I wonder if he's not, you know, I don't know, the character itself, just personally, it wasn't like my favorite part of the series or anything. I don't know that he was ever really one of my top tier favorite people in the show or anything. I know maybe for a lot of people it was, but I think I think what he does provide a really good example of is seeing the potential in somebody that nobody else sees. You know, when you think of him protecting his sister in the way that he did, he is maybe going above and beyond what a lot of people think would be necessary, and again, because he knows the potential that's there before anybody else does. So I think from that perspective, I think it was maybe that element of his personality or of his character that really stood out to me. And I wonder how many of us would flourish in an organization if we did have somebody who was willing to really just stand up and say, you know, I know what this person is capable of, even if you don't, and, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other thing that I really liked about him, there's a scene in the series where Jane gets hurt. It's after Jane betrays him, and he's got him on the table, and he kind of makes it look like he's going to exact some revenge on Jane, but then he basically just says, when you're on my table, you're my patient and you can trust me. And that was one of, I think, the better opportunities that they gave his character, because he is fairly one-dimensional through a lot of the different scenarios, right? Like, it is all about his sister. Like, this is the person that I'm willing to sacrifice everything for, and she comes before all else, and that's understandable. But then he has this commitment to crew that in this one scene where and I thought that was just like a really good choice that they made for him to give him a little bit more depth.
I think that was Dr. Kevorkian's same stance, wasn't it? When you're on my table, you're my patient. Is that?
I was hoping we could get through this episode without a Dr. Kevorkian reference, but
sorry, apologies.
No.
Kaylee! Kaylee, what in the spectre of hell are you playing at? We got the primary buffer panel coming right up.
Everything's shiny, Captain, not to fret.
You told me those entry couplings would hold for another week.
That was 6 months ago, Captain.
My ship don't crash. She crashes, you crashed her.
I loved Kaylee's character, and I'll be pretty brief about her as well. I loved her character because she was so earnest all the time. And I think she really showed that person who is perfectly happy doing the job they've been hired to do, and is exceptional at it. And Liz, I think you and I probably know the exact person I'm thinking about in our professional history, who kind of is this person who just goes to work and does their job really, really well, but still has a life and still has a character and still has dreams. They just all seem to kind of surround the situation that she's in when she's on the ship. And that's kind of where she's the happiest, is when she's in the engine room, she's doing her job, and she's solving problems. And I love that, because when we talk about followership, or we talk about leadership, or we just talk about the corporate environment or the organization that the structure within an organization or a system, that's the person that every leader is dying to get within their space. Somebody who is excited to do their job, good at doing their job, really doesn't have any at least overt ambitions to take on a strong leadership role at that point, maybe as part of their 5-year plan, but ultimately is just somebody who's been hired to do something and is excited to do that. And yet she has a personality. There are elements of her personality that you get to see through some of the different episodes, then also in the film, of course, like her infatuation with Simon, and how kind of adorable that is, but also like it almost plays against the idea of being adorable, in that like she's a person, she's a human. She actually has she actually has feelings. She's not just this monolithic character who's just this one thing. And so I really like what they did with her in that series and then in the film. And I really, really wish that I could hire her to do instructional design for me or something.
I'm not saying the 8004 is hard to repair, it just ain't worth it.
It's a fine machine. You just keep it tuned.
Saibu's sure the extenders ain't braced.
I've been telling them to buy an 8010 for years.
Those tenders snap off, don't matter how good the engine's cycling.
Miss Kelly, I wonder if I could request...
Wait a minute, let her talk. She's talking.
By the way, the 8010's the same machine. They just changed the plating. Hope no one noticed.
Liz, what are your thoughts on Kaylee?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she is the ideal employee. She's positive. She creates this like positive work environment for everybody. It's hard to get her down. And then she loves what she does, you know, which is great. And, you know, Mal tells her no often enough, or like, you know, you can do it. I believe in you. You can do it. Can I? Okay. I'm going to try with nothing. You've given me nothing to work with, but I'm going to do it, you know? And she's a very good, her followership is great, I would say. And she does occasionally speak up when she needs to. And, you know, I think feels more free to do that maybe in the show than in the movie, but yeah.
How do you create not create, I think probably having somebody at the organization who's like that is probably just innate to that person. But I think, you know, like in society where if you look at like Shark Tank, for example, what we hold up as the dream is, I'm going to start my own business and that business is going to grow and I'm going to become rich and successful and I'm going to keep moving up until I'm Jeff Bezos and money and power and all those things. How do we get past that? And how do we have somebody like Kaylee who is happy working in the engine room? And how do we not continue to sell people this idea that unless you're at that next rung, that'll be when you reach happiness? Because I think she really defies that. And I think that's pretty great.
Yeah, I think part of our viewpoint is we're an individualist culture, right? And so that's why we value like the individual success, whereas collectivist cultures, they value everybody working together and each part has its part, which I can appreciate. I can actually appreciate things about both cultures, but maybe if we melded those a little bit better, and if we focus less on all of our media and all of, you know, everything is focused on in the individual success and the self-made business person, right? I think if we focus sometimes on people like Kaylee in their job, then we would see that as a more positive thing.
I've always been curious about the idea of ikigai, which is that Japanese concept, of kind of meeting where your passions, where you're good at, what makes you happy, and all of those things converge into the middle. I almost wonder if we focus more on something like that, if we wouldn't come to a more pleasing place as a society.
Yeah.
Because Kaylee's one happy camper, and I'm a little bit envious of that.
Yeah, totally. And I think you're right. I think if we shifted our focus, that'd be better for everybody.
It reminds me too, there was when I was in high school, my high school guidance counselor, this is a true story too, my high school guidance counselor, you remember those tests that you would take that would say, when you grow up, you should be X, Y, or Z, and you take the test, or if you had $1 million, what would you do? And then that's what you're supposed to do or whatever. So I took the test with my high school guidance counselor and turned it into him. His response, or whatever my score was on the test, he said, you should be a magician. Like, my actual thing was, you should be a magician. And I often look back to that and I think, maybe I should have been a magician. like I laughed at it for like 20 years and now I'm like, did I miss it?
I think when it comes to the commitment of shelling out money for magic lessons and devoting yourself, you want to take like 6 or 7 tests just to make sure.
Yeah.
In fact, Liz, I think you have a test that he could take, right?
Yes, I do. There are a number of them. Brett and I are actually working on an ikigai or ikigai concept, but using validated tests developed by the government.
The government.
You want those? I can administer the one, and you can take the others. But I think you did take them, except
I
for
think
the last one.
I don't know that I took the last one. I think there
Yeah.
were some interruptions in our communication at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to continue to take those. I almost wonder if that's something that is that something that you guys are going to be offering as any kind of resource or anything like that for people that maybe are looking for guidance, or is that something that's out there that people can find?
I mean, they can do some of it on their own, but not the we're developing it so that we can offer it eventually. But that's going to be a couple years in the future, I think. We're
Super
looking for a
interested in
programmer.
that. Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool.
Dear Buddha, please bring me a pony and a plastic rocket.
Mal, what are you doing here?
Let's talk about Inara really quickly. We've actually been going at this for quite a while, which is great. Let's talk about Inara. I guess, Liz, do you want to start us off? Give us. Oh, sorry. I guess I was. No.
Okay.
Alexa, stop listening.
Alexa had something to say about
I don't know
it.
if that's a real thing.
I am terrified of our culture right now.
Why? Because the robot just weighed in on
Because the robot just interrupted the podcast to make sure things were kosher. I don't know how I feel about that.
Liz, how do you feel about Inara?
Yeah, so Inara is, I think, an example of somebody who displays leadership in her own space. We see her generally being very controlled, caring about her I don't know, fellow workers, employees, she's separate, she's not actually part of the organization, really. Sure. Maybe more consultant-esque, but these people matter to her, and she does follow her moral code actually very closely. And I'd say she's somebody who does gather some of that, like I was talking about early, personal power through relationship.
Oh.
Yeah.
Inara is Morena Baccaran's character, is that correct? Yeah. Oh. I don't know that I have much to add about Morena Baccaran's character. I'm sorry.
No, I think that was a good summary of who she is to that crew. I like that. I like the tension that they create between Malcolm and Inara. It's fun to watch. It's one of those things where, like, you just shout at the TV, this isn't realistic, because none of us have ever been in a situation where there's that much sexual tension or just relational tension, and you're just not willing to address it. But also, I've dated two people and married both of them, so I can't say for certainty that that's not true in all of the world, just in my little world. But I did like that she built equity with each of the characters in a different way. And I think, like Malcolm, she's able to engage with each of the different individuals in a unique way, to show that she cares, to show that even though she's separate, she is part of the group, when she needs to be there. And then there's just the moral check that she puts on Malcolm when she has a philosophical disagreement with the way that he's doing things. She's not afraid of challenging him.
Well, you invited me.
Never thought for a second you'd be stupid enough to come.
Well, that makes you kind of a tease, doesn't it?
You knew my invitation wasn't on the level.
Which led me to conclude that you must be in some trouble.
I'm fine. I'm giddy.
For a woman schooled in telling a man what he wants to hear, you ain't much of a liar.
Val, you cannot handle this man.
And I think, unlike all of the other characters, she doesn't need to. She not like in the show, she's shown to be kind of one of the best at what she does, right? She's a leader in her field. And yet she's attached herself to this kind of ragtag group of misfits that are shenaniganing across the galaxy, engaging in these misadventures, and she's sticking her neck out to help them. And I think that shows a specific amount of power that she's allowing herself to have in that group of people. And so to me, that makes her a stronger character than even some of the others we've talked about, because unlike the others where they're kind of seen as like Kaylee just happens upon this job because of how Kaylee just happens upon this job.
Because of her love for engines.
Because of her love for engines.
Let's say that.
And her affections for their former engineer.
Yeah.
But she happens upon this job. It's not something that she's done before, but she is truly excellent at it. But then, so she's comfortable. She's doing it. She loves it. She's great. She's there. You have people like Jane, who just kind of took this job because this job was the higher bidder. You have people like Shepherd Book, who's a passenger who's just caught up in all of this. But you have somebody like Inara who could do something really anywhere else, and in fact starts the film out doing just that, where she's now like she's in the dojo, and she's showcasing that she's the best at what she does and helping to train the next generation in her industry. But then she also recommits herself to this group of people, and I think that that's a really beautiful thing to see, both in like outside of that show, but in the corporate environment, is somebody who's really good at what they do, and they choose to be a part of something that's dysfunctional or broken or not, that it's not the Mackenzie of its universe. And that's something that I can really appreciate as somebody who relies on people like that to be able to push their mission forward, at least in my space.
Is Inara maybe the opposite of what we were talking about before, which is, we were talking about the follower trying to grow within the organization. Perhaps she's the opposite of that, which is, she is highly qualified, has the degrees, and chooses to work at the grocery store because she just likes it there. When she applies, they're like, "You are way overqualified for this. Are you sure you want to work here?" And she's like, "Yeah, I hate," maybe she doesn't hate working at the other place, but just having the freedom to choose and interact with who you want. I think we've all had those conversations if we've worked within an organization where, we find ourselves perhaps visiting a different department within the organization. And it's like, man, I would really like to work within this department, or I'd really like to try this out for a while, or whatever. And even if it is maybe a step down from where you're at as far as the reward you're receiving or the compensation you're receiving from the organization, maybe there's something to the value of the happiness that you derive from being in there. And I don't know, maybe that's the convergence point where the Kayleys and the other folks that are looking for change can come together, is what is that balance point between the compensation and the reward that you're receiving from work versus the happiness that you're getting out of it.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like you're talking, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It almost sounds like you're talking about person-organization fit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
She's willing to, and she says that a couple of times. She's like, you're keeping me from making money. Like, you're keeping me from getting jobs, but she's found a group, she's found a family that she fits in really well with. And I think that that's something that we should really try to either create that environment for the people that we're responsible for, or if we're not in that environment ourselves, try to find that environment or make that environment if we can, create that environment again. Okay. Wash.
I'm a leaf on the wind. Watch how I soar.
One of the things, like you said, even though he is fairly one-dimensional, spoilers, is that when he does die later on, there is a very clear hole within the team, and nobody's going to make the same jokes that Wash is going to make. Nobody's providing that charisma that he provides and brings to the group. And so to me, Wash really was an example of charismatic leadership and winning people over that way. Again, really great follower, really great example of doing the job, doing it really well. Mm-hmm. And that is such an asset, and we need to find a way to make that more valuable, I think, in our society, is what I keep coming back to.
Yeah, so I don't know that I would think that he displays much leadership at all. And from my perspective, I think he is charismatic. I don't know if I would call it charismatic leadership. So we might differ on that point. But
all right, let's get into it.
I'll put on my boxing gloves. Yeah. No, they're too far away. So I don't know. I think they did make Wash a little one-dimensional with his one-liners and his quips, and he's obviously in love with Zoe, and like you're saying, Brett, maybe not fully aware of, he's like aware that she's like badass and like quite capable, but like he still kind of wants to save her,
Yeah.
So that's an interesting dynamic. I appreciate about him that he's willing to let his wife be, the leader that she is on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't really like challenge that a whole lot. That's what he signed up for. That's what he likes, and that's great, So I don't know. I do think that his death, like nobody was like as cut up as they should be about that. I'm like, what? So nobody's even crying? I would be like, okay, I'm still fighting, but I'm crying.
Yeah. I was crying. No,
I know, and I was like,
and I do think so. So Zoe is so disciplined, and and again, Zoe's my favorite character in the whole series and in the film. Zoe is so disciplined, and her lack of discipline in that final fight when she loses control, I think that was her exhibiting grief in the way that her character exhibited grief, right? Which was to just completely lose it. And I think that part was even more emotionally triggering than them all just trying to kind of get out of the way when we knew that he had died. I will say, the one thing I will say about, like, as far as whether he's a leader or a follower, I think in the same ways that there are times when Kaylee, who we've talked about being perfectly capable and confident in her abilities, but still vulnerable in many ways. I think that he's forced into situations where he's shown to be vulnerable. I mean, the man can't fight to save anybody's life, and that's a really weird thing for him. And there's plenty of characters and stories where you have a man who's being forced to allow his wife to fight his battles for him, but that's not very common. It's not so common that we can't go ahead and call that out. And yet I think his ability to accept that is exactly the character that they need in that space, exactly the character that you would want in your organization, who understands what their strengths are and is cocky about them. I mean, he is cocky about his ability to fly that ship, but then understands that this is not one of my strengths. And sometimes he kind of goes up against that when he, like, volunteers himself over his wife to keep her safe or whatever. But by and large, in the story, she just does her thing and he does his thing. And that's exactly what we want, right? People to understand what they do well, do it well, understand their limitations, and then they're willing to allow other people to step in and fill that role. And for him, it just happened to be his wife, which was fun. This conversation would actually be much better if my wife was having it with you guys as opposed to me. So maybe we'll get her involved sometime.
Yeah, Diana, bring her on.
Chickens come home to roost.
The hell? It's okay. I'm gonna leave on the wind. What does that mean?
Malcolm, let's give him what we have left of our energies.
Somebody has to speak for these people. Y'all got on this boat for different reasons, but y'all come to the same place. So now I'm asking more of you than I had before. Maybe all. As sure as I know anything, I know this. They will try again. Maybe on another world, maybe on this very ground swept clean. A year from now, 10, they'll swing back to the belief that they can make people better. And I do not hold to that. So no more running. I aim to misbehave.
Oh, Malcolm.
Well, for me, I'm gonna go back to charismatic leadership again. For Malcolm, I would say that perhaps while Wash demonstrates charisma I would say that Mal demonstrates, I think, true charismatic leadership. I think both as an actor on the series, Nathan Fillion, I mean, that's just kind of who he is. He's got charisma, and but the way that he brings together this group of people to rob banks and be willing to do the things that they do for him, I don't know that he would be able to do that if it wasn't for him being such a strong presence as a charismatic leader. It's funny because the examples that are given of charismatic leadership are often like Christ and Gandhi and Muhammad. I don't
For
think of
charismatic?
yeah. In the Burns book, they talk about
Oh, okay.
them. Yeah, they talk about those as examples of like charismatic leadership, and I don't think of Mal as that. Like I
He's not
definitely
your
don't.
Gandhi character.
Yeah, he's not my Gandhi character. He's not. He's not starting a cult or a new religion or something like that. But he is sort of a unifying force with all of these sort of diverse group of people, and there's something there that's holding them together. Yeah.
It's funny because for charismatic leaders, like I was reading over some of my like class PowerPoints and things, and what I have listed for them are like Hitler and Jim Jones and JFK. Those are very different people, but those are very charismatic, but people that people will follow without question. I think that's kind of the thing. And I guess I feel like Mal is like half a charismatic leader because they will follow him, but they still question him sometimes.
Piece or two of the other ships, stick it on. Any place you can tear hull without inner breach, do that too. We're gonna need paint. We're gonna need red paint.
Sir, do you really mean to turn our home into an abomination so that we can make a suicidal attempt at passing through Reaver space?
I mean to live. I mean for us to live. The Alliance won't have that, so we go where they don't follow.
God's balls, there ain't no way we're going out there.
Living if you sink to the level of a savage.
Reavers, they'll eat us alive.
This is how it is. Anybody doesn't want to fly with me anymore, this is your port of harbor.
He can get everybody riled up and get everybody excited, and then he can also make just the totally like the wrong call. And he almost is too stubborn to admit it. Especially initially, he doesn't admit it. And so when I was looking at the leadership that he expresses within his crew or with his crew, and I was thinking about, is that the leader that I would want? And I gotta say, no, it's not. Like, I like Malcolm Reynolds, and I think that he's perfect at what he does. But I would not want to go to work every day with Malcolm Reynolds as my boss. I would have a very difficult time. Just personally, I'd have a very difficult time. And I'm all about the charismatic leader. I'm one of those people who emotionally, like, I will connect with somebody and just follow them to the ends of the earth, or until they get dismissed, as has happened before, because of the way that they're able to just rally the troops and give that impressive speech and to be out there in the forefront, guns blazing. But I don't think that for me, that's the most effective way to both reinforce the values of your organization and to keep me engaged in the long term.
It's one of the videos that I was watching about Serenity, because I was looking for some different viewpoints on what people's thoughts were on the show and stuff. I can't remember if it was a quote from Joss Whedon or somebody else. I think it was Joss Whedon, but essentially he talks about the world of Serenity is sort of this is a group that lost the war, right?
Yeah.
And so the group that lost the war, we're now following them. It's not Star Trek. It's not a massive, successful, united federation of planets. I wouldn't even say it's Star Wars. It's not a ragtag rebel group that's even remotely organized on that level. It's a ragtag group of people that's organized onto one really crappy ship, and
sorry, Kaylee. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
that crappy ship is working really, really well. I mean, probably the best comparison between like Star Wars. I wouldn't make too much of a correlation between like Star Trek and this, but maybe more Star Trek in the or Star Wars in this would be like the Millennium Falcon and Serenity are probably closer in line with each other.
If they had no backup, it was just that crew.
And, I mean, it's Chewie and Kaylee are in the back, you know, slamming spanners onto things and cussing and growling at the machinery. I don't know why I went down this path, other than to say, I think in response to what Brett was saying, you know, the idea of Mal fits within this for sure. The idea of Mal does not fit within the confines of, say, maybe, or at least I don't think, not for me, the confines of, say, like an organizational setting. Maybe something more like Star Trek. I couldn't see Mal as a Starfleet
The Starfleet officer.
No, like I think of, what was it, Captain Jellicoe, who came in and was very structured. Very, you know, every time you see a captain or an admiral in Star Trek, they're very structured. They're very whatever. And I don't know. I don't see that from him. I don't see him in the organizational setting. Maybe as an entrepreneur, maybe as a venture capitalist, maybe as a rogue, whatever. But yeah, he's not somebody that I would want as a boss for sure.
See, I'm a little bit divided here, because I think that I would work for Mal from Firefly. I wouldn't work for Mal in Serenity.
Okay.
I feel like the character changed a bit, because we see him being, you know, he has thought ahead more in Firefly in some places, and tried to make a plan with his crew, and he does listen to them more there. I feel like he's very authoritarian in Serenity, and he is a bit that way because of his military background in Firefly.
Sure.
You know, and you kind of need that for a ship to run well. You can't have like everybody, you got to do this and do it now, you know, if your lives are at stake. And I see him treat his employees with respect more in Firefly, and where he doesn't do that in Serenity, right? So I guess, yes, he shoots from the hip a little bit, but but we also see him make some of those plans and things, where I don't know that I see that in Serenity. And I don't see like the maturity that sometimes I see in Firefly, where, you know, he talks to River afterwards in a gentle and kind of a kind way after she like gets rid of somebody. I think there's
It's the bounty hunter.
The bounty hunter. Yeah. And so she's like gone out and come back, and, you know, and he treats her like she's one of them, and like she's like, permission to come aboard, so, and he's like, yeah, you know, like and then you don't see that leadership and calmness. Like he's like fighting with the doctor and whatever and yelling, and I don't know, on Serenity.
Do you think that has anything to do with him being proactive versus reactive? Like he's a leader who's really good at being proactive, but when he has to react to something, he doesn't do it well?
Yeah, that's possible. That he might get triggered more easily. Just when he has to be reactive, I'm not sure. There are obviously like leadership theories that talk about leaders in different circumstances being more effective. So
yeah, I was just going to say, like, I think in the film especially, there was so much more that he had to react to, you know, that may have, like, I don't know if they thought they purposefully made a change to his character in between the series and the movie, if they did it because they needed some finality to it, or if he was just presented with a different set of challenges and had to react to those in character, and that was maybe how that came out a little differently. I think we need to watch it 6 or 7 more times before we can answer those questions.
I hate to / also don't hate to make another video game reference, but I'm going to, and that would be I think of several like popular card games that exist, whether it's Magic the Gathering, whether it's, you know, Magic the Gathering is not a video game, it's been around for a long time, whether it's Hearthstone, whether it's Legends of Runeterra, a lot of these card games, there's different play styles in those decks. There's play styles like aggro, and an aggro play style is where you just go ham. You put down all of your aggressive cards. You're pushing to win the game as fast as you can. There's other play styles like control or tempo, where maybe the game is slowed down a little bit more. Maybe you're a little bit more reactive. You're waiting to see what the other person does and wear them down. And I think to what Liz is saying, you know, we really do see a different Mal between the series and between the movie. And in the movie, I almost wonder if we see an example of Mal playing the wrong deck. Mal is really trying to hold it all together. It doesn't seem like he's maybe trying to get involved. He's trying to, I don't know, like just he's not reacting well until he does. And it seems like there's that point to where he's finally willing to do what it takes.
When Shepherd Book is killed, and then he finally just decides, like, you know what, well, we need to, instead of running from this, we need to run at this.
Yeah, he's taking the, they're fighting an aggro deck. The Reavers are an aggro deck. They're super, I mean, they're maybe Reavers are true charismatic leadership. Maybe there's no choice. They just follow. I don't know.
But Alex is like, forget all of these leaders. I like that Reaver leader.
Yeah, that Reaver
leader is going to
really
be
stuck with me. Who was the Reavers leader? Would that be the planet? Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah, they're a true kind of like social harmony, sort of like everybody's equal in the same terrible way.
Oh,
they have found their ikigai or their whatever.
I think that we've taken a lot of time to examine this, and I think we've only touched a little bit of it, but I appreciate you guys engaging for a couple of hours on your day off on this topic. I'm excited about where this is going, and I think that this was a great conversation to kind of, we have so much sci-fi, and there's so many different sci-fi characters that we're going to be able to talk about, but I feel like a lot of them are represented in this series and film. Like a lot of those different archetypes have been represented in Firefly and Serenity. It's been described as a cult favorite and something that was not appreciated in its time. I see it as just a victim of Fox and their poor planning, but I do see so much value in that series and in that movie.
Well, What's interesting is even the way that the series played out in the movies and the series. This is not a gang of winners. This is a gang of losers. And even the series and the movie,
like
they didn't do well, but that's why we love them.
They were able to actually succeed against all odds, including the network, which did not want them to succeed.
That is breaking the third wall, truly.
That's right. All right, guys, really quickly, I'm going to run down. Today, I'm going to talk about the 5 values, but I want you to just think of the character that is the example of those values. So when we go through teamwork, wholeness, integrity, compassion, and excellence, I want when I say teamwork, Elizabeth or Alex, who do you think best exemplifies teamwork?
The Reavers.
Kaylee.
Reavers. Okay. I would say Kaylee as well. Wholeness.
Shepherd Book.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Shepherd as well.
Okay, I would say Shepherd. Integrity.
Maybe Zoe.
Okay, her actions are consistent with her values.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what your definition of the word is. Can I go there with integrity?
Take us there, man. Take us there.
I'm gonna go. If it has to do with how your actions match up with your values, I'm going to go with the assassin.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good call. I'm going to say Jane. I think Jane's actions are consistent with his values all the time. But we can debate that later, I guess, offline.
I think we might have to.
Compassion.
I'm going to say Simon.
Okay. True acts of selfless compassion.
Yeah, but between Jane and his sister. Yeah.
I'm going to go with Inara.
Mm-hmm. I almost want to say River.
Okay.
Because, I admitted she caused a lot of problems for them, no fault of her own, really.
Right.
But then she, in Serenity, we see her sacrifice herself, possibly. And then she wants, to get to Miranda for reasons for the greater good, that kind of thing. And I don't know.
Okay.
All right.
Excellent. I'm going to say Kaylee for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Or Wash.
Yeah, or Wash.
Or Inara, for that matter.
We've not mentioned Malcolm once in this list, but I think that's the power of that show, right? Like, Malcolm is the leader of this group, but they're all embracing specific aspects of at least how I've decided to define leadership, the values that I've decided to define leadership by.
And I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, but I will say this does remind me of something my dad used to say quite a bit, and that is, basically don't be intimidated by and find people that are better than you in all of the areas that you need people. And in fairness, I do feel like that's something that Mal perhaps has done a really good job at. He's found people who he knows what their good qualities are, and he has brought them together to build a team. So from that perspective, he hasn't been intimidated by people that are doing things better than him, because he sees their value and he sees their skill. So that perhaps is maybe his greatest leadership trait.